Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 Plus 4 Remake, it's practically on every single console. From older generation Nintendo Switch, PS4, Xbox One, to the current gen Xbox Series SX, PS5, and Nintendo Switch 2. This game might be a good way to benchmark all these different consoles that released as early as 2013 and as late as 2025. I'm going to be comparing this game on Nintendo Switch, the Switch 2 versus PS4, Xbox Series S, Series X, PS5, and PS5 Pro. There's a lot to cover, so let's get started with the game size. Not a huge game. If you compare the game size alone though, there seems to be 3 versions. Switch 1 has its own thing going with about 20 gigabytes. Switch 2 and PS4 seem to be the same version, around 37 to 38 gigabytes. And the current gen Xbox Series S, X, and PlayStation 5 seems to have the highest version, around 45 to 47 gigabytes. Loading times are up next. Going from the main menu to actually start skating takes 8 seconds on PS5 Pro. Switch 2 second place, around 24 seconds. Switch 1 takes 39 seconds, and PS4 with its ancient hard drive takes 42 seconds. Now I didn't show Series S, Series X, and the base PS5 here, but they are going to be similar to PS5 Pro, around 8 to 10 seconds. Next, let's look at the graphics and FPS performance, starting with the Nintendo Switch 1 versus Switch 2. We saw how much smaller the games on the Switch 1. Switch 1 has a lot less detail. There's missing objects. The levels are clearly dumbed down. They're missing about half of the detail. Switch 1 doesn't have any reflections. The shadows are also low quality. In the side-by-side, Switch 1 has no reflections in the water puddle. In fact, it's even missing the complete sewer hatch. Switch 1 renders the game at around 540p and then outputs to around 1080p in docked mode. Nintendo Switch 2 is around 1080p output resolution, but the natives likely upscaled from around 650p. Now, some people might be okay with the missing objects, the lower details and resolution on the Switch 1, but what's a killer is the frame rate. Switch 1's locked to a sluggish 30 FPS. The newer Switch 2 does deliver a much more playable 60 FPS. Now, there's some games I would be okay with 30 FPS, but this game isn't one of those. You can literally feel the difference when playing. It's actually harder to play and land tricks at 30 FPS on the Switch 1. The game just feels so sluggish. In terms of performance, both consoles do deliver a solid locked experience. Switch 1's locked to 30 FPS and Switch 2 is a solid locked 60 FPS. I didn't see any drops at all whatsoever during my tests. The main advantage of the Nintendo Switch consoles is portability. In portable mode, Switch 2 does have that 1080p output screen, so you're gonna get 1080p 60 output, but the native in portable mode is likely lower here as well. We saw how similar the game sizes are on the Switch 2 and PS4, so how similar are the graphics? Well, they're almost identical. The level of detail, the graphics, the resolution, Switch 2 is really identical to the 12-year-old PlayStation 4. You see a small difference in the colors, and that's really because of the difference in HDR settings. Switch 2 might also look a little bit more crisp, and that's because of that 4K output signal you get in docked mode. I didn't have a PS4 Pro to compare to here, but if I did, then the Switch 2 would look identical to a PS4 Pro. PS4 runs at the same upscale 1080p 60 FPS on Switch 2, similar native resolution as well, and it's a solid lock 60 FPS without any drops or issues. Xbox Series S is a step up from Switch 2 and PS4. Here you can see the additional detail the Xbox Series S brings. There's more objects, more details in the levels. Now the jump isn't as substantial as what we saw between Switch 1 and Switch 2, but still, there's a jump. I personally didn't even realize there was a difference until I actually sat down to compare my captured footage. Series S also has a higher native resolution of around 720p, but the difference in the final output resolution here isn't much. Both consoles run at a solid lock 60 FPS here without any drops. The Series S's 60Hz fidelity mode is shown here, but the Series S, Series X, PS5, and PS5 Pro do have a 120Hz performance mode. I'll cover that a little bit later. Going from the Xbox Series S to the Series X also improves the graphics. The level of objects in each map are essentially the same. The difference is really in the resolution. Series X runs at a higher 4K dynamic resolution at 60 FPS. There's also improvements in quality of the shadows and reflections on the more powerful Series X. Xbox Series X, the base PS5 do look identical. There isn't really any difference between the two. This game is showing as PS5 Pro enhanced, so I compared the base PS5 to the PS5 Pro and I couldn't really see a difference at all. Both consoles look exactly the same. Same graphic details, exact same resolution, even the shadows and reflections are identical. I zoomed in 4 times here and even with that, no difference whatsoever. I've seen in other games where kind of standing still doesn't do the PS5 Pro justice and the difference is more apparent when you're actually moving around. While with Tony Hawk's 3 and 4, I checked that as well. Here's some gameplay when I'm zoomed in 4 times and once again no difference here either. So I'm not sure what the PS5 Pro Enhanced badge brings to the table for this game because I didn't really see a difference. FPS performance as expected is a solid lock 60 FPS in fidelity mode, no drops whatsoever. As I mentioned before, Series S, X, PS5 they also get that 120Hz performance mode. Here the resolution does drop slightly to achieve that 120 FPS. Xbox Series S is pretty much a solid lock 120 FPS. There's some rare drops of 1 or 2 frames, but no one's really gonna notice that. Series X, the base PS5, PS5 Pro, they also deliver a solid lock 120 FPS in performance mode. And this 120Hz performance mode is really where the Pro may have a bit of advantage, but it's really nothing significant. This is all dynamic resolution, so the Pro should be able to give a higher average resolution when trying to get to that 120. And there you have it. That's what you need to know about Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3+4 on all these different consoles. I recommend this game on whatever console or device you have, except the Nintendo Switch 1. Avoid getting it on the Switch 1 if you can, but on everything else, it looks and runs well. For the rest of the video, check out some more side-by-side comparisons between the different consoles.
Shadows of a dismal, stormy night behind us. Shadows of a dismal, stormy night behind us.
Let's see it.